Zookeeper Rick was doing his daily check in the monkey area when he suddenly spotted a baby monkey crying in the corner. On closer inspection, Rick saw that he seemed half human and half ape. Where had he come from? What would the DNA test results reveal, and why did they have to hide? Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. Rick went to see Charles, one of the zoo's favorite vets. Almost all the animals loved him because he was wonderful. Rick wanted to take a DNA test to find out who the baby came from. He thought it came from Conco. That would have made more sense. Charles was going to perform the DNA test. He took the needle to draw blood and placed it on the monkey, but the needle broke immediately after trying to push it into the monkey's skin. This was quite strange, so Charles tried again with a larger needle. Charles gently placed the needle on the monkey's skin. He did not want to hurt the little animal, which was a newborn. However, this needle also broke immediately. It was very strange, since the needle was usually used for large gorillas. Charles decided to use a larger tool, the knife. He wanted to make a small slice in the monkey's skin and then draw the blood. It took some effort, but Charles managed to take some blood samples from the monkey. Now they had to wait for the results. Since it would be a few days before they had the results, Rick and Charles decided to put the monkey in the area with all the other babies. There he could become acquainted with others of his species and perhaps begin a long friendship with one of them. The next day, when Rick arrived at the zoo, he noticed something he had never seen before in his entire career. The baby monkey was standing on a rock, and it looked like he was trying to say something to all the other monkeys looking at him. That couldn't be true, Rick thought. It seemed very strange, and this was a very unusual situation in the zoo. It seemed like the baby monkey was showing leadership among other baby monkeys, but how was that possible? The baby monkey was only 2 days old. Veterinarian. Charles received the results of the DNA test. He hadn't looked at them yet because he wanted to do it with Zookeeper Rick. He went to a private room with Rick so they could see the results together. They both turned pale after seeing them. They had never seen anything like it in their entire lives. They didn't know what to do or who to tell. These results would have shocked the entire world, and many investigations would have been opened if they had revealed the issue to the world. Nothing like it had ever been seen in the monkey species. It turned out that the monkey had 25% human cells in its body. It was very shocking because this was only seen in movies, yet it had happened before their very eyes. Neither man had never seen anything like it. Where did it come from? There was no correspondence with the other monkeys. Rick and Charles were in a strange dilemma. What were they supposed to do? Report this to the zoo? If they did, the government would more than likely become involved and end up experimenting on this cute monkey. They didn't want that to happen. They were totally helpless. Rick and Charles didn't know what to do. Finally, Rick decided to take the monkey to his house. At least there, the monkey would be safe from the outside world. At the time, only Charles and Rick were aware of this situation, so no one would have noticed. Rick took the monkey back to his house. At first, the monkey was slightly afraid to walk around and explore the house. It was unknown terrain, with no other monkeys around. It took a while for him to settle in, but finally he seemed comfortable. Rick took a few days off so he could be near the monkey at his house. He saw that the baby monkey was happy, energetic, and sometimes even smiling. The two formed a close bond. From that moment on, James called the monkey Apollo because he was very special. Apollo continued to grow very fast, which was quite unusual for that type of ape. Rick decided to take a new DNA test to see if anything had changed in the past few weeks. He informed Charles of his plan, and Charles arrived at Rick's house the same day. At Rick's house, Charles performed the new tests on Apollo. He remembered the needles breaking last time, so he prepared himself with a good knife to take blood samples from Apollo. It turned out that it still contained 25% human DNA, so nothing had changed during the time that Apollo was at Rick's house. However, both Rick and Charles decided to let Apollo live at Rick's house because it seemed like he had a good life there. The monkey was getting smarter every day, Rick doing a lot of exercises with him that you would normally do with a small child. Apollo performed almost all the exercises successfully, effortlessly completing even difficult exercises that other children would not be able to complete. Before we continue with this mysterious story, like this video to help it reach 20k likes, share, and subscribe to our channel. After some time, Rick also learned sign language. Communication between the two was difficult at first, but over time, both Rick and Apollo managed it. It was crazy what Rick could do with this monkey. Over time, it felt like Apollo was his son, eventually developing a great relationship. After 7 years together, Rick and the monkey became best friends. Rick loved him and would do anything to protect him. Years passed and the monkey began to grow very quickly, both in strength and intelligence. One day, however, all this ended. Rick's friend Emma was also aware of this secret. One day, she was outside the house having an animated argument with the neighbor. The neighbor touched Emma aggressively and Apollo saw everything from the window. He decided to protect her and ran out of the house, not hesitating as he jumped on the neighbor with all the energy he had. He bit and scratched him as much as possible, damaging him severely. Things got really intense. The neighbor was totally shocked by Apollo and decided to call the police. Emma knew things wouldn't end well for Apollo. The police arrived and Apollo stayed in the house while Emma and Rick talked to the neighbors and the police. Rick tried with all his might to resolve the matter and not turn Apollo over to the police. The neighbor was still furious and wanted Apollo to leave the neighborhood, so the officers took Apollo with them. Rick drove with the police officers to the monkey sanctuary. They hadn't realized that Apollo was a special monkey, so he was put in a monkey sanctuary with other normal monkeys. Rick had already noticed that the sanctuary was in poor condition and he didn't like the owner. He seemed to mistreat the monkeys. Rick continued to visit Apollo at the sanctuary. He saw that Apollo was not happy at all. It was very difficult for Rick to see him in this condition. Rick tried to do everything he could to secure Apollo's release, but the government would not consider releasing him. However, Rick was determined to free his best friend. Apollo had to return to his cage, where he immediately began to look around him. He had never experienced such a poorly maintained place. He had to find a way out. He saw that his cage was not of good quality and noticed some places where he might break through. He saw a small spot on the upper right corner of the cage which seemed weak. He thought maybe he could try to open it with his fingers. He tried and tried, using all of his strength. Eventually, he heard a loud bang. Apollo could not continue his escape because the owner of the enclosure was suddenly after him. Apollo crawled to the corner of the cage, but the owner aggressively grabbed him and took him to another room. Apollo was confused and scared. What did that man want to do to him? The owner took out a water gun and pointed it at Apollo. The man didn't even care about Apollo's obvious fear and continued spraying him for almost an hour. He didn't stop there either. The force of the spray became stronger and stronger every 10 minutes. What this man did was vile cruelty. While Apollo was close to tears, he began to think about Rick and his moments with him. This gave him some joy in that terrible moment. He really wanted to get out of there and go back to Rick's house. He was desperate. The next day, he was back at the monkey sanctuary with all of the other monkeys. He looked at each monkey and saw the sadness in their eyes, every one of them malnourished and depressed due to the poor conditions there. Apollo began to look for other weak points to try to get out again. He searched, and then he found it. Apollo noticed an exit from the sanctuary. It was the ceiling. He saw a slightly cracked window. He could use his hands and feet and try to open the window. Given the poor condition of the window, it might be possible. Apollo felt that this was the way out for him. The cages were Apollo's first obstacle because he had to get out first. It wouldn't be too difficult given the poor condition of those cages. Furthermore, he had already come a long way since being arrested a few days earlier. He knew it wouldn't take long to get out of the cage. Apollo ate the food given to him and examined all the staff members, taking in as much information as possible. That night would be the night of his escape. He knew that he probably only had one chance to resolve the situation, so he had to be precise. After waiting for a while, the time finally came. All the staff members had already gone home. Then, eventually, the evil sanctuary owner left too. There was noon left at the sanctuary. Apollo knew that the time was right, that he would begin the escape from there. He had no time to waste. He had to get out of there as soon as possible. He went to the weak spot that he had noticed a few days earlier, but realized that someone had fixed it. It was going to be harder than he expected. Apollo used the brute force of his feet to open another gap in the cage. It took him a while, but he finally made it past the cage and out. He quickly headed to the tunnel that led to the public monkey playground, where he managed to escape through the roof. Apollo arrived at the public area where all the other apes were normally. He knew exactly where the weak point was. He was at the top of the roof, so he rushed to a tree, climbed it, and then jumped onto a rock, from where he continued his way to the roof. The moment he was on the roof, he could see the small crack in the window. He just had to jump across it. He was immediately successful. Finally, he could see the street below him. Luckily, it was night, so there was no one on the street. He ran to Rick's house, wanting to get there as soon as possible and be with him again. He had thought about him every day, shedding a tear each time he came to visit, and now really needed to get back with his best friend. He was almost there. Rick was very surprised to see Apollo. How the hell did he get home, he thought. However, Rick was also incredibly happy to see his best friend home and away from that terrible monkey sanctuary. But Apollo had to tell Rick what had happened there. Apollo used sign language to describe what had happened when the water gun was fired at him. He also noted that each of the other monkeys had previously been attacked with the water gun and that they were all malnourished. Because of this, many monkeys were about to die. Rick was completely surprised by what Apollo had told him. Rick told Apollo that he would file a police report the next morning. Suddenly, Apollo became enraged and began jumping aggressively inside the house. It wasn't enough to file a complaint. It wouldn't work. In that case, they would have realized that Apollo was free and that he was different from all the other apes. As a result, he would be locked up again. Rick and Apollo had to take matters into their own hands. Rick was surprised by what Apollo had told him and how he did it. Apollo seemed to have improved his intelligence while he remained in the sanctuary. He had reached a new level. 8 years earlier, Rick had never imagined that this monkey would be able to do this kind of thing. Rick and Apollo sat at the table, wondering how to handle the situation. Rick said maybe they should get revenge on the owner of the sanctuary and shoot him with water. It would have been good revenge, wouldn't it? Let him taste his own medicine. Apollo handed Rick a sign that said, "No." This would not have improved the situation at the sanctuary. In fact, it would have made the situation worse for all the other monkeys. He wanted to help all the other monkeys. The situation there was terrible. Rick and Apollo decided to come up with a plan to free all the other monkeys. Apollo had freed himself and was aware of the sanctuary's appearance. Rick asked Apollo if he could come in and then maybe open the door for him. Maybe it was possible. Apollo nodded. Now they had a plan to free all the other monkeys. The plan was to release the monkeys into the forest a few kilometers from the city. It was a large forest with thousands of acres of trees and wildlife. It was the best place for them. Rick and Apollo got ready and headed to the sanctuary. When they left, Rick felt on edge. He had never done anything like this before. He could very well have ended up in jail for it, and Apollo would once again return to the ape sanctuary. Was it really the best thing to do? Looking at Apollo, he saw that he really wanted to free the other apes. This convinced Rick to continue the mission and free all the other monkeys. It was the right thing to do. 10 minutes later, they finally arrived at the monkey sanctuary. Apollo immediately climbed to the roof of the sanctuary. About 15 minutes passed before the door to the sanctuary opened. Rick entered and followed his friend Apollo along with all the other monkeys. Rick could see how horrible the monkey sanctuary was as they headed to the cages. Even though he already knew it was bad, he could never have imagined how bad it would really be. Finally, they reached the cages. Rick looked at all the other monkeys and was almost brought to tears by the poor condition of some of them, but he reminded himself there was no time to cry. Apollo approached Rick, carrying the keys he had taken from the staff room. Rick freed all of the monkeys, who made their way to the entrance of the building. Rick quickly grabbed his truck and drove to the entrance. All the monkeys quickly got into the truck, and Rick drove as fast as he could to the forest where all the monkeys could be released. When they arrived, all the monkeys jumped out of the truck excitedly and climbed the trees. Rick and Apollo looked at each other, and Rick waved, indicating that everything was now fine. It was time to let Apollo go and let him enjoy complete freedom. Apollo and Rick hugged, and Rick suddenly realized that he was grateful for every moment he had shared with him. Rick shed a tear and Apollo wiped it away. "Only good memories, my friend. I love you," he said. Then, Apollo disappeared into the trees, along with all the other monkeys. Have you ever developed a way to communicate with an animal? Do you think animals are more intelligent than we give them credit for? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to like, share, and ring the notification bell for more wonderful stories like this. We'll see you in the next video.